Okay, shall we go?
Let's go.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Psychology in the Wild, the podcast where we try to make sense of the chaos of everyday life. I'm Erin Shrimpton.
And I'm Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts.
Let's talk about what's wild, Gemma. What has been wild in your life?
Well, that's actually quite an easy one today, because today is the day that my children have gone back to school after summer holidays. So they've been off for 8 weeks, which is a bit insane. And 2 hours ago, I dropped them at school. So yeah, the chaos that has come off the back of that has been quite unreal, which I know anyone that either has children or remembers going to school and like going back to school day, because we've all been there, will know what that feels like. What's been wild your end?
Oh, same. I mean, we went back last week. Because sometimes it feels like we are all going back to school, doesn't it? They went back last week. My children went back last week. And actually, one observation I will make is I always build it up in my head as, you know, something that's going to be a really difficult transition and really challenging. And actually, I will say that both of my children so far have actually been quite happy going into school. So I will be definitely taking that one as a positive. That's a wild positive example. But I think it's everything around it, isn't it? It's the fear of kind of having to let go of the nice, slightly less pressurized mornings, and the new teachers, and will they like the new teachers and all of that, and, you know, seeing friends again and getting all the friendship groups all set up again. But actually, I think it's overall, just again to kind of reassure you, because I know you're sort of a week behind us on that. I've found it to be better than I expected. So how are they going in though this morning?
We had mixed emotions. So one of them was absolutely buzzing, like bouncing off the walls, raring to go. And she's the one who, they both love school, but she's the one that, and I know exactly what's going to happen, because the same thing happened every term last year. She's going to love it, getting back into it, until she realises a couple of weeks in that this is actually a routine. Like, she has to get dressed every morning. She's the littler one. She has to brush her teeth. She has to be there. So she kind of like is in her own little time zone. She doesn't like being rushed. We have to be quite, I don't know. Sometimes my husband and I will rush her because we're like, that's normal life. We're going to have to do that. Sometimes we're like, I might be panicking inside thinking we've got to be somewhere in 10 minutes. But I try not to let that come across, because she can just spiral and just start, I don't know, she just doesn't like to be rushed. She has to do things in her own time frame. So she was bouncing this morning. And I know her crash is coming later. And my oldest little girl was just a ball of anxiety, even though she's excited about seeing her friends and getting back into it. She loves school. So she was trying to pick fights and trying to wind the other one up, who actually for once was like doing what I needed her to do, the littlest one. I was like, oh my God, how is it when she's doing what I need her to do? Got herself dressed all on her own, which she never does. Socks and everything she struggles with. And then the older one was trying to pick a fight. And it did make me laugh. I think you've got to laugh in these situations, because she just has this knack, or they both do, of, you know, if things are going quite smoothly, one of them will do their best to derail it. But I even said out loud this morning, I was like, I will not be derailed this morning. I will not be derailed. As you were just saying in my head, I was saying it out loud. And they've got no clue what I'm talking about, but staring at me like I'm just a little bit nuts. So we've had lots of emotions, but I also feel quite emotional because, well, obviously they're going to a new year, and every time I obviously do all the pictures in front of the door, as I do every year. But I also feel a bit emotional because we've had a lovely summer in lots of ways. I thought it was going to be really hard, and it hasn't actually been that hard at all. It's been, I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong, there have been some really challenging bits, but mostly it's been quite nice. And now I've got to get back into normal routine as well. And I don't think I'd realised, I've taken most of summer off from work, and I don't think I probably realised what it was going to be like getting back into it. So this, actually, us talking now, is my first piece of work. I started with the fun stuff. It's my first piece of work, like proper work in months. So I'm trying to get my head around that as well.
Yeah, and so that really has back to school vibes, doesn't it? That feeling of, right, we have to get serious about life again.
Because the thing is, we have to go through that as well. Like even pre having kids, every September, I always, for my whole life since been at school, have had that back to school feel in September. And I'm sure loads of people experience that, which actually I think brings us quite nicely onto the topic which I've chosen today. It's going to be another therapy session for me. It's my 52nd therapy session during these during these podcast chats. And I think it's time really that we delve a little bit into change and what change means for us, why it's so difficult, why sometimes it's easy. But generally, when we talk about change, we talk about the tricky bits of change. And it's something that I know a little bit about from a psychology perspective, but I'm definitely not an expert on it. Like this is your area, I think. I mean, you may not want this area, but I've given it to you.
Thank you. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I didn't really intend for it to be my area, but I suppose because I worked over the years in culture change and culture, creating great cultures, a lot of that ended up being about helping people to get through change. And change is just underlying absolutely everything. I mean, I think you are an expert in change because you talk, and your area of expertise is resilience. And really, so much of what I talk about around change is actually so related to and maybe adjacent to what you would talk about with resilience. So they're very interconnected, aren't they? I think you're right. I think actually some people do like change, and actually some changes are fine, aren't they? And you don't realize, we don't really give ourselves enough credit when a change that we go through actually was fine and we managed it well. We don't really probably give ourselves enough credit for that. It's the changes that we find discombobulating that are the hard ones, and that are the ones that we kind of tend to focus in on. But I think it's helpful to understand why change is hard in the first place. 100%. I think it's, to understand, first of all, this is what, this is, and also that pretty much everyone experiences uncertainty as uncomfortable in some way, shape or form. And that's because, so basically I kind of like to call the brain the little prediction device between our ears. So ultimately, there's loads of different theories around why change is hard. Lots of different neuroscientific things you probably heard about, the lizard brain and how once upon a time we used to fear the saber-toothed tiger, and now we respond to any change in our environment like there might be some sort of threat, like a saber-toothed tiger nearby. But actually, the explanation, and that's probably still valid, but the explanation that I find most applicable really is that our brains constantly are trying to predict what's happening next. So that's why I call it the prediction device. Constantly trying to predict what's happening next. And when we can't predict what's happening, we feel that as discomfort. It's like a physiological evolutionary response to get ourselves back to something, back to a situation that actually is predictable. And, that discomfort, it's sort of a generalized term, isn't it? But that discomfort is, I kind of deliberately use it as a generalized term because I think we all feel change and the anxiety of change and the fear of change in different ways, probably. But overall, it's just not comfortable, is it? So, in reality, what we have to do is just learn to be a bit more comfortable with that discomfort. But that's not easy, is it? So this is where, yes, we can turn to psychology to identify a few things that we can do for ourselves. And I think that's the crux of it, isn't it? It's always finding things that we can do for ourselves that will help us feel more prepared and feel like we are on top of, and we can get through, what's happening or what lies ahead of us. But I think it's important to say that, you and I study this stuff and we still find change hard. It's, I don't think we'll ever become immune to that feeling, but it is helpful to know when you get the feeling, this is what I can do. I don't know. Have you found that over the years you've in any way become better with change or immune to it? Or
it's a very interesting question because I think it's really helpful. I found it really helpful. And I know that people I've worked with, like in a coaching capacity, found it helpful to understand what's going on with change, like why we're reacting the way we are. So, i.e., our brains like things to be predictable. It keeps us safe. We know what's coming next. Your body's not expending too much energy if it knows what's coming next. And, as soon as things change around us and our brains to do something different, or our bodies need to do something different, that uses a whole lot of energy. And if you think we're trying to conserve as much energy as possible, that can be really uncomfortable. So physiologically, we're not really set up to enjoy lots of change. But what I find interesting about that is, firstly, from a resilience perspective, so one of the things that can help you to be more resilient is actually embracing novelty and different things going on around you. And novelty means something new. Taking a different route to work, taking a different road, or walking down a different road, or getting off a different tube stop if you're in London. Or I look at it like it's inoculating you a little bit against future change, because you're doing these like little micro changes and you're getting used to doing things in different ways. So we know that can be really healthy and positive. But the other thing I've been thinking about as well, so that question, am I better with change now than I used to be? And I probably am. But I also feel like I've got a fairly high tolerance for change, I think. And as I say this, I'm thinking about it, because I'm like, actually, maybe I should ask my husband, because I'm sure my mood's been very up and down the last couple of days with this change of going back to work. But actually, overall, I'd say I've got quite a high tolerance for navigating change. And I think that's because I've had so much of it in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And I've kind of built up a bit of a change tolerance over time. I don't know if that's a thing. So don't get me wrong, I still find it hard, and especially big changes like this. I look at today as going back to work, and I get quite emotional about that, because obviously like summer's over and I'm going back to routine with the kids, and there's quite a lot of emotion tied up in my change today. But big changes still can throw me off course, like moving house, or that's for, we'll dive into that conversation at some point, but we're looking at a big move, and that can really throw me off course. But I feel like I have got better with change because I've got more used to it over time. And it's same with resilience. It's the more you do these things, I say about resilience, the more you face challenges, the more you're building a resilience toolkit. It's probably, I'd imagine it's probably the same with change. Do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think yes. And I think there's just always going to be these changes that happen like this one every year that we'll always just feel a bit uncomfortable around. And then, like what's happened to me, I'll get, stressed about it, and then it'll happen and I'll go, oh, actually that wasn't so bad. But I think that's just the natural cycle of, the conversations you're having with everyone. Everyone's getting kind of built up about the changes that are happening, and so you can't help but do the same. And also, just in fairness, the mental load around this kind of a change as well, making sure the uniforms are all ready, making sure you've got them signed up. This is particularly when you have kids, when you making sure you've got things them signed up to all the right classes, and all of that jazz is it's actually just stressful, or it's an addition to your load. So that might not even be to do with change, that just might be to do with too many demands in your life. But yeah, it's actually really interesting, because I think it is also important to say that I think there's the aspect of, probably a bit like nature and nurture, isn't it? There's the aspect of, if you've been through lots of change, you're probably more resilient to it. But there's also probably a dispositional point as well, because if you are high on the personality trait openness to experience, then you're probably more likely to be up for new stuff and up for change. Because we all know those people who we've worked with over the years who are really keen to like get stuck into new projects and maybe some of us who are less so. I probably am more on that side, actually. I think I'm pretty high on openness to new experience. So there's that to consider as well, because if you're somebody who just dispositionally is not really that open to new stuff, then change is going to be harder for you. And, and again, it's worth acknowledging that and having a bit of self-compassion. So that's always the first thing I would start with, is just acknowledging this is probably hard for everyone. Yes, there's some people that it's maybe a bit easier for, whether that's because they've been used to change over their lives or because they actually just naturally have that personality trait where they are higher in openness to experience. And just acknowledging that and just, realizing, okay, this discomfort I'm feeling is normal. I think that's so important to remember.
I love that.
And it will pass.
And the idea of self-compassion, I think, is so important. And actually, I hadn't really thought about that so far in this conversation. Taking away that judgment. So having self-compassion and understanding, I'm finding this hard, and maybe having some of the language around that, being able to talk about that as well, and just, to ourselves and to others, saying, I'm struggling a bit with this, I'm finding this a bit hard. Why does it matter if, in a bad way, like, why does it matter if you're struggling with change today, or you didn't yesterday, but you are today, or it was okay with this stuff, but not this stuff? Part of what I love about these conversations we have is that we're demystifying some of this stuff, normalizing it, and giving people permission, ourselves included, to not be judgmental about it.
And actually, on that point, I think that really definitely brings me to one of the things I definitely want to mention, because one of my kind of bugbears is the term change resistant, because that gets banded around, obviously, in an organizational context, where it's like, oh, we have a population who's very change resistant, and the reality is people don't resist change, they just feel disempowered by it. It may manifest as resistance, it may look like resistance, but the reality is it's just that they're being human and they're feeling disempowered, because you've got your current state where you know exactly how things are playing out. So, if you think about, you wake up in a day, you know what your job is, you know how you're getting to work, you know what technology you're using, you've got this down to a T. Then an unforeseen change comes at you, and suddenly, or you know that it's coming, which is almost even worse, I think, when you know there's a change happening in 3 months' time. It's kind of even worse, because you're thinking to yourself, and it might even be subconscious, but you're thinking to yourself, okay, but I don't have a framework for this. I don't know how to be in that environment. I don't know how to use that technology. I don't know how to interact with a new team. I don't know how to represent a new brand when an acquisition has happened. And all of that starts to internalize as a loss of confidence, a loss of, as I said, empowerment, and a bit of fear as well. And that's kind of the other misconception. People don't fear change. They fear that loss. They fear the loss of what they have right now, and the loss of, the future, where they feel a loss of capability, to be honest. So I think that's a really important thing, again, to remember, where we're just human, and we're trying to get our heads around all the different things that are happening to us on a daily basis, including things that are changing on our own direction, but things that are changing and that are being done onto us. So, the thing that I would really highly recommend on that front is, and I know you talk about this in resilience as well. It's sort of applicable across the board, I think, and it's probably are we allowed to have favorites when it comes to concepts in psychology?
100% we can.
I have my few little favorites, and one of them is self-efficacy. Okay, so self-efficacy is basically the belief that you have what it takes to get through whatever's in your path. You have what it takes to get through a challenge. You have what it takes to get through, something unforeseen. And self-efficacy, unfortunately, I'd love to say you can go off and do a course in self-efficacy and then you've got it. But it's one of those things that you have to practice every day, isn't it? It's like a muscle. Go to the gym, you've got to keep your muscles up. So funny, actually, this reminds me of my youngest thinks he has a six-pack. And he says, he apparently told a friend of mine recently that he had a six-pack, and she was saying, oh, great, are you going to continue to work out? And he's like, no, I have it now. And that's it. And I didn't like to burst his bubble.
I need one of those.
Yeah, I didn't like to burst his bubble. Oh no, that's really not how it works. Unfortunately, that's not how life works at all. Anything like that, anything to do with your health and well-being, anything to do with muscles, anything to do with psychology, you got to work on these things every day, and that is hard work. But anyway, It's empowering and it's better than feeling disempowered. So the thing about self-efficacy is that it's all about building it. So Albert Bandura, who is, again, if you're allowed to have favorite psychologists, he was one of mine because he's come up with some brilliant theories that I would refer to all the time. So he coined the term back in the 70s. So it's been around, Gemma, for even longer than us, if we can believe that. And through his research, he found a number of different things that you can do to build your self-efficacy. But the one there's kind of two that I love the most. And one of them is just to experience success. And I know that sounds like, well, how are you supposed to do that when you're feeling overwhelmed by change? But I would set the bar really low on this one. Like in the morning time, instead of thinking to yourself, as I often do when I wake up, you open your eye and you think to yourself, oh, what is being demanded of me today? What do I have to deal with today? Try and say and reframe and say, right, what will success look like today for me? And I think that's a really helpful thing to do, because instead of thinking to yourself in the long run, what does success look like to me? Which of course we should be doing as well. We should be setting ourselves goals. But actually, we're trying to manage day to day. We're trying to manage day to day chaos. We're trying to manage the wild in the day to day. So if we think about, well, what's success in this one day? So like today, it might have been the girls going into school happy, or a nice photo that you get outside the front door. And we all know how actually that is often very touch and go when it comes to the success of getting a happy looking photo.
I mean, maybe we should lower our expectations for success today.
Yeah. But honestly, sometimes I'm like, right, success today is, it's literally a 5-minute nice conversation with one of the boys before they go to bed, or rearranging one of the shelves in the fridge when it gets completely overloaded, or in a work context it could be actually remembering the name of our podcast email address.
Yes, I mean that will be a success today. So actually, on that note, should I actually say the correct email address? So the reason we're joking about this is in a previous podcast recording, which we were both watching before today, just check it was kind of, it's still quite new to us, so we're just checking everything is as it should be. I talked about our email address and how people should get in touch with questions they might have or topics they want to cover, and I gave the completely wrong email address. And as I was in the end, I was like, I'm so sorry, we're gonna have to cut this. And Leon, our producer's like, no, it's fine. You said you bought two. You have to buy the email addresses or whatever. He said you bought two of them. I was like, yeah, I did, but neither of them was this one. So actually, for anyone that wants to get in contact, and please do, because we want to know the topics that you want us to cover as well. So we want to know the challenges that people are facing, what psychology topics people want a bit more info on, or a bit of help navigating. And the actual email address to get in contact with us is hello@psychologyinthewild.com, and not the weird thing that I made up.
I can't even remember what you made up. But
I know when he was saying it again, but I was like, oh man. And I was, the funny thing about that as well, I was so proud of myself that I'd done something that I was supposed to do in that podcast recording, because there's loads of stuff we're supposed to do that we keep forgetting.
I know.
And I just got it totally wrong. So that should have gone in our failure episode. Actually, it was our failure episode. It was the episode on failure. And I was like, this is failure in the moment.
Do you know something as well? I was listening to that episode again because, just especially as we start off this podcast, we're kind of listening through it to make sure that it's all, we've done what we need to do in it. And there's so many times through the podcast, I was like, oh God, I failed to do that. I failed to do that. I failed to do that. I should have, when you asked me, I think in that episode, what failures had I experienced in my life, I didn't even go near some of the major fails that I've had in my life, even within that podcast. So yeah, anyway, sorry, we're getting a bit meta now. Where were we? So hello@psychologyinthewild.com. Yeah. We've got that. Success, Gemma. We've done it. Absolutely.
And I'll say again at the end.
Let's do it.
You don't need to rewind, just listen to the end.
So boost our self-efficacy there. But yeah, I think it's, or even in a work context where I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to achieve loads in one day. But of course, one day, we've only got one day. You can't achieve the sun, moon and the stars. So set yourself a goal of, making progress on something. Set yourself a goal of, if you've got an update to do at your team meeting, really smash that 30-second update. And I think then at the end of the day, you can experience and feel that success, because we shouldn't be waiting to experience success until we get to the end of something. We should be learning to experience it every single day, even if it is in just those minute ways. And then I think the other one that I love, and maybe even love more than that one, that Bandura came up with, because Bandura also came up with social learning theory, which is all about watching others and learning from others, which is, I think, again, like a huge concept that it's important for us all to be aware of, just how much we learn from others, particularly in, organizational culture. So much about organizational culture is all down to what you learn, and as soon as you go into the door of an organization. I'm not talking about what skills you learn. I'm talking about the behaviors and the attitudes that you learn as soon as you go through the doors. But another great thing about social learning theory is that we can learn so much from watching others, and that in itself boosts our own self-efficacy, because we've got these mirror neurons in our brain. So when I'm watching, say for example, Gemma, if on a day I'm not feeling particularly confident, or I'm just having one of those days where I just really just feel like I'm overwhelmed by change, I might think to myself, oh, I can't do this, I'm not able for this. And I'll pop on a video of Gemma Lee Roberts smashing one of her LinkedIn learning videos. And I think, and actually just the action, because what the mirror neurons actually do. So obviously you've got neurons in your brain firing and wiring if you're doing the action yourself. But if you're watching somebody else doing the action, those mirror neurons are actually literally doing the same thing. So your brain is rehearsing what you're watching somebody else do. So it might be, I think this is why cooking programs are so popular, when you're feeling really tired, you don't feel like cooking yourself, but actually watching somebody else cooking, you're rehearsing that skill. So that in itself boosts self-efficacy. And the reason I like that is because it acknowledges that of course, there's going to be days where you feel low in confidence, where you don't feel like you're full of energy. And maybe there's nothing you really feel like you've experienced success around, but you can still watch somebody else succeed. And that in itself will give you a boost. That in itself will give you, as I sometimes call it, a power up, a boost in self-efficacy. Do you ever do that? I think I do. I think even before I learned this,
Yeah, I think I do. The only thing I think about that is we have to be very careful. If we're watching someone else do something successfully and you're not feeling great, like you're not feeling like you're in a place to be able to do that, we have to make sure that we're taking away that judgment, though, in terms of, oh, I can't do that, or I wish I could do that as well. So it's not watching something in that sense. It's looking from it's not a reflection on you that someone else is doing something different. It's more like a curiosity. And actually, I think I've used this tons in my life. Literally, as you were speaking, it kind of clicked into place. So the whole reason I'm a psychologist is I read loads of autobiographies when I was little, and biographies. And I still do. I still read tons and tons of biographies. Or I was watching like a program about Disney built America last night. That's my idea of fun. Even though I've already read a book about Disney and how he did it, I'm still watching. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot that. I forgot he did that. And I think that has been a really good way for me to realise I can do things. I can overcome challenges, because, I think we've probably talked about, we've definitely talked about, I don't know if we talked about it in the podcast yet, but we've talked lots about the fact that there isn't, in terms of career-wise, there's no one I'm really following. And it's very similar for you as well. Like, we don't really know anyone that does the same work as us, or works in the same way, or has the same setup in terms of lifestyle and other responsibilities in life and work, and like all this stuff we're trying to put together. So sometimes it can be really hard to know what to do next, because I don't have a blueprint. It's not like I'm trying to be a partner in a law firm and there's a set like steps I have to take. I think ultimately, I didn't set out on my career as a psychologist knowing exactly what I wanted to be at the end of it. And I still don't necessarily, but I knew what kind of life I wanted, and I knew the kind of work I wanted to be doing, and I knew I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to work for myself, and I wanted to create stuff. But I also don't know anyone that's ever done that. There's nothing I can follow. And I'm setting up this whole new subscription on Patreon there's no other psychologists that do the type of stuff I do on there. So I've got no idea if this is going to work. But I think the only reason I try these things, and I do find ways around things, and I do eventually, I'm not saying it's the right way of doing it straight away. I don't always know that. I'm not psychic. But I get asked that a lot. I used to get asked in the old days, I say as a psychologist, and people say, can you read my mind? And I'm like, no, that's psychic. I can't do that. If I could do that, I'd be a very, very rich lady. I wish. It'd be very handy.
Though, do you wish? I mean, actually, also no.
Actually,
I
no.
don't. If you could switch it on and off, that would be
yeah.
Good.
It could be like a superpower you could have sometimes. Also, I'm like, I'd quite like someone to read my mind because it's all over the place half the time. So maybe I should start there, reading my mind, and then learn about other people's.
Totally.
But I do think this, like, you know, exposing myself to all these stories did build a curiosity, because I wasn't, you know, I'm not reading Walt Disney's biography or, you know, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of some really, I'm not going to tell you some really odd ones, but, you know, there's normal people in there as well, like Elton John and Keith Richards and those kind of things. But I'm not reading them because I want to be a guitarist or I want to be a singer or I want to, you know, I can't draw. I'm not trying to create cartoons. I'm reading because I'm interested in how people shape the lives they wanted, or how they made, I think my thing is probably how they made things a reality. And I didn't know that until recently. Like, it's quite, I quite like the creative process of making something that's in your head a reality. But I do think maybe they are my little, they have, those experiences have been my power-ups because, you know, because it's shown me that people can deal with new things, new challenges, come up with new ideas. Like, they didn't have all the information, and people are working this out as they go. So I probably have used quite a lot of that in my life without even realising. And I'd say it's probably, I mean, depending on your definition of success with that, it probably has worked out really well for me, I'd say.
Yeah, that's actually an amazing insight to take away from your interest in autobiographies. I think that's absolutely true. I think it actually, it's similar to self-efficacy, because another thing that I would talk about with change is the concept of agency and that belief that you can affect change in your own life. So even if something is happening to you, even if this change or you're going through something, an adverse circumstance of some description, taking action to affect change in your own life and the belief that you can is hugely correlated with, you know, success through change and obviously probably resilience as well. And I think that's probably what you learn from reading those autobiographies. I think if you compare and contrast all of the autobiographies of people who've done amazing things, it's that they've used their own sense of agency. You know, they don't wait for somebody to come and do something for them and to sort their lives out for them. They just get on and find what it is they need to do and do it for themselves. And I think part and parcel of that is, you know, what we've just said, which is being clear on our own minds, which I definitely am not always either. But I think probably you do get those moments of clarity, don't you? Moments of clarity are enough to propel you forward with that sense of agency. And yeah, I think that's really, actually, I quite like also reading autobiographies, but I've taken note of all of those ones that you mentioned there, because I think that is also, it's the sort of the sense of overcoming, not just challenge, because everybody in life has challenge. Like, there's literally nobody I know who hasn't been through some challenge or another. We all have challenges. So, and overcoming adversity, but it's just overcoming life, what life throws at you and how you respond to that and how you get to where you want to be, and kind of pushing away the sense that we've to conform to what society says life should be. And you know, and going forward and actually using your own agency and making it work for you. So I think that's another big one with change as well, is personal agency. Just, you know, really remembering that although this whole feeling of change is uncomfortable, we all as human beings have agency in some way, shape or form. We can affect change ourselves. So if change is happening to you, you are able to affect change that will get you back to a kind of an equilibrium of some description. So yeah, I think that's a really good intel. I'm off to read more autobiographies now.
What I will say as well about that is I don't remember any of the details. I couldn't tell you what age Keith Richards was when he picked up a guitar. I couldn't tell you what age Edison was when the light bulb finally worked. I just kind of pick up these general themes, which is funny because I was thinking recently, I was like, God, I read so much and I don't retain the details. I get these kind of overall ideas, this kind of picture that kind of pieces together. And I was thinking recently, that's such a waste. All that information I could be learning and retaining and using. And then I was like, well, actually, you know, kind of similarly to I said at the start of this session, I can't really be judgmental about that because I can't help it. That's just how my brain works. Like I experience it at the moment. I'm taking it in at the moment. And I guess I'm taking out key themes. But actually, when you combine that with all these different stories, there's actually bigger things. It's not about one person or what one person did. It's about these bigger ideas of what we can do in general as people. And what I'd say as well about the whole agency, I think it's such an important point. We can't control everything that happens to us. We can't control big changes that come our way. We can't control challenges that throw us off course. But we can control some things. There will be small things that we can control about a situation. We can control how we respond. We can control who we talk to about the situation. We can control how well we look after ourselves in that situation. We can control how compassionate we are to ourselves. And I think these tiny, tiny pieces of thinking about, okay, what can I control here? What can I do here? What action can I take here? Those are the things that help us to remember that we have agency. We can direct some of this. Not everything in life is going to happen to us. Lots of stuff does happen to us, but there's some things that we can decide how we then react or what we do next. And I think that is such an important point when it comes to thinking about how we navigate change. And hopefully it's quite comforting.
I think so. And sometimes it's annoying.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, because there are times when I've become overwhelmed, you know, with whatever's going on for me. And I just think to myself, oh, I know that I should do something about this because, you know, I'll feel better if I if I take action here, I'll feel better. But I'm tired and I don't really want to. But obviously always, it's a bit like, again, going to the gym, isn't it? You always feel better when you do. So yeah, it's an important one to remember, but also not to beat yourself up with it. I think, again, the theme of this podcast is very much we're all for self-compassion and doing what you can do when you can do it. It's you know, that's an important one. There's one other one I want to touch on, because I think actually what we will probably do is talk about this whole topic in its entirety in a whole podcast in and of itself, because actually, if I'm allowed to bring another favourite of mine, bring all the favourites in this one, another favourite topic of mine is psychological flexibility. So, and the reason I talk about this with change is maybe fairly obvious, is to do with adaptability. So another thing that we kind of bring upon ourselves, you know, and you know, like LinkedIn's skill of the moment is adaptability for obvious reasons. There's so much going on in the workplace. There's so much change happening, whether it's to do with post-COVID ways of working, whether it's to do with the explosion in generative AI use and how it's completely revolutionizing the way we work. I don't think there's any job that's not affected in some way, shape or form by some sort of volatility. So we all have to be adaptable, right? Mm-hmm. But the issue with that is, I find, if somebody tells me, or if somebody said to you, Gemma, now you're moving house, you just need to be more adaptable to get on with it. I just feel like that's kind of an unhelpful thing to be told. So I think we need to get a bit more clear on what it is to be adaptable and what do we mean by that. And I think psychological flexibility can really help us. So it's a really big topic. It's a skill that you can learn. As I said, I mean, you can literally almost do a master's on this. So we won't go into it in loads of detail now, but I'll just pull out what I think is one of the really important parts of it that really helps me anyway go through change, or helps, and I think, you know, to teams that I would work with, is in order to be adaptable, you have to know what you're not being adaptable about. So you have to know what you're not moving. You have to know what is staying stable. And because the problem is, if you are told I need to be adaptable, I mean, that just feels like a really unpleasant state. Just being completely and utterly flexible and, movable. And that just feels like, hold on, now we need, and going back to, the brain needs this predictability. The brain needs stability of some description in order to be able to to survive, to help us survive. So one of the things that psychological flexibility teaches us is to get absolutely clear and stable and unwavering around our own values and the outcomes we're after, the goals we're trying to achieve. And I think that's really, really helpful, because it means that once you're really clear on what's important, and I kind of wrap that up by saying, get clear on what's important to you. So especially when you're going through a big phase of change and a big period of uncertainty, often we get, and again, we're bombarded by so much information and content, and in a way, for when it comes to schools, for example, we have access now to so much knowledge, so much more knowledge than our parents did in the 80s. I'm not saying it would have been easy for them. There's different challenges for them, but now we just know so much more. We're connected so much more. We have all these WhatsApp groups going on. Our brains are completely and utterly overwhelmed with all the things we could be doing. And we have to kind of rein that in a little bit and go and remind ourselves, no, I need to find stability around what's important to me here. What's important with this meeting? What's important that we achieve? What's important for us in how we talk to each other and how we interact with each other? And so that comes down to obviously getting to know your own values and getting to get close to, what you value in life and what you see in others. And then it obviously comes down to, getting clear on our goals and those kind of future successes. So earlier I talked about the success of the day to day, but of course also we need to be a bit clear on, okay, well, what does success look like to me here? So a house move, for example, you might want to visualize, like, of course, that between now and then there's going to be a lot of change and discombobulation, but if you visualize the end and what it's going to look like for you, that really helps you along the way to be more flexible, because you have that grounding. You have the grounding of, okay, well, this is what's important here. That's going to give me confidence to, along the way, be a bit more adaptable. And then you use something we've talked about as well on the podcast, your experimental mindset. Along the way, I know what my values are. I know what my goals are. So actually, I'm quite happy to experiment along the way and to maybe fail along the way so that I can learn. And that really, I think, helps people get through that phase of change where, because it's completely unhelpful to think that we should just be completely agile in every way, because we can't be. That's not possible.
Yeah. No, it's not. And actually, I love that, because if you know the firm things that aren't moving, that you are working towards, or things you are doing, you're right. Then it takes the pressure away, because you feel like you can be more flexible with other stuff that perhaps doesn't matter so much, or maybe it doesn't matter how you reach that goal. It might take a bit longer, or you might have to change course, or, this big obstacles popped up and got in the way. But it makes you feel like you can be flexible with that. You can adapt around that, because the stuff, exactly as you said, the stuff that isn't moving. The stuff that you are working towards, or the stuff you are doing day to day that isn't moving. I think that's such great advice.
Yeah. I mean, it even helps. It helps on so many little micro. I mean, this is why psychological flexibility is just, for me anyway, such an important life skill, coping skill. It helps with so many different things. I was even thinking about it recently. I was out for a meal, and the thing that I ordered arrived, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, right? And I could feel myself getting really kind of annoyed about it and disappointed and feeling like that was just going to, ruin my meal altogether. And I just took a breath. And of course, I should say, part of psychological flexibility, the first step in it is kind of doing a bit of a mindful check-in, noticing what's going on for you and all of that, which I know we've talked about before in the podcast. So I did that. I just sort of took a bit of a breath and went, right, what's important here? And the important thing here is that I'm having a nice time. I'm out for dinner, which I don't get to do very often. I'm having a nice time. The goal of this whole situation is that, we get to go out and have a nice time. And my values are that, I'm having a bit of fun and I get to have great chats or whatever it is. And suddenly I realized, do you know what? This order turning up and not being what I expected is actually really not important, because those other things are the important things. So it allowed me to be more flexible. And then it allowed me to go, do you know what? Yeah, that wasn't ideal. I'm going to order something nice instead after dinner. You know, or I'll order myself a different glass of wine, or I'll order myself whatever it might be. And so it allows you to be more flexible with when you really pull it back and tune into, right, what is actually important here. It allows you to just go, okay, that's not important. I'm going to be more flexible at this particular moment, and I'll use my agency as well to choose something, an action that's going to get me to where I want to go in the future. So that's a tiny, very, very trivial example. But, you know, I think even just bringing it back to like little moments like that, it really reminds you of how you can apply it in bigger situations as well.
Perfect. Amazing.
I mean, there's other things we could talk about with change. We could probably literally do a whole day podcast on change, because it's just a massive topic.
We could.
But those are some high level examples.
And that's exactly what and also I think you've got a course on this. Actually, you've got more than one course on change on LinkedIn Learning.
Courses around change, yeah.
Which are brilliant. They're so good. And I love this. You talk about this concept of power-ups, these little power-ups, which are some of the things that you talked about today. They cost like power-ups to get you through. I love that concept. So anyone that wants to delve in a little bit further on this, I'd definitely say check out your LinkedIn Learning course, but also your newsletters on LinkedIn as well. You might be see Elvis the dog flapping around in here, by the way. He's joined me today.
How does he feel about change? Is he okay with change?
Well, not really, no. He stayed out on Sunday night, and I picked him up on Sunday because we were out as a family.
Oh, yes.
I'd say he did go to a dog minder. I'd say he needs to listen to this podcast. He needs to understand a little bit more about how he reacts to change, is what I'll say. So I'll have a little word with him now.
I'll see you later with your flip chart, giving him some pointers and psychological flexibility. Right, Elvis, what are your values?
It'd be like chicken and cuddles generally, and a ball. Are they values? No, Elvis, they are not values. So wish me luck. So on that note, stay safe in the wild. We'll chat next time.